Okay, so have you ever heard of a guy, and this is totally true, building bombs in high school? And not like as a prank, but because he found the instructions too easy?
Really?
Yeah. It's Peter Thiel, the guy we're diving into today.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's putting it mildly.
Right. I mean, this is someone who escaped communism, co-founded PayPal. Talk about an unconventional past.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And his book, 0 to 1, is kind of like his playbook for, building the future, which is what we're breaking down today.
Exactly. Think of it as a cheat sheet for understanding, really understanding how to build a successful business today. Not just like another startup, but something that truly changes the game.
And that's the key, right? Thiel's not just talking about building companies. He's talking about creating entirely new things.
So not just iterating on existing ideas, which so many people get stuck doing.
Right, not just going from 1 to N, just copying what's already out there. He's talking about going from 0 to 1, making something completely new.
Which is a distinction I think a lot of people miss.
Totally. And he uses the dot-com bubble as a kind of a prime example. You think back to the late 90s, it was insane valuations. Yeah, for sure. But it was also this time when people really believed in this idea of going from 0 to 1.
They have that, what does he call it, definite optimism.
Exactly. That's the core of it. Believing in a better future, but not just hoping for it, but actually having a plan to make it happen.
Which is a critical difference.
Totally. He contrasts it with, like, indefinite optimism, which is more like, oh, things will be better someday, but without any real idea of how to get there.
Right. So it's the difference between saying the world will be a better place and saying, here's how I'm going to make the world a better place.
Exactly. And that's where the real work comes in. And a lot of it starts, he says, with contrarian thinking.
So challenging conventional wisdom, looking for those hidden opportunities that other people miss.
Because they're too afraid to, question the status quo. He asks this great question. What important truth do very few people agree with you on?
Ooh, that's a good one. So it's not just about being different for the sake of it.
Right. It's about having the courage to see the world differently. And then, crucially, to act on those insights.
To challenge the best practices, as he calls them, that often lead to dead ends.
Yes. It's about understanding that what works for one company in one context might be totally wrong for another.
Which leads us to, I think, one of his most controversial ideas, monopolies.
Right, because we're conditioned to think monopoly equals bad.
Exactly. Higher prices, less choice for consumers. The bad guy, right? But Thiel flips the script on this whole idea.
He does. He says monopolies are totally misunderstood. People focus on the short-term downsides, like, yeah, maybe prices go up a bit.
Yeah.
But what they miss is that monopolies, especially in tech, they can actually drive progress and innovation.
Okay, so explain that. How can a company with a monopoly actually be more innovative? It seems counterintuitive.
Because they have the resources and the incentive to invest in long-term R&D, to take the kinds of risks that smaller companies simply can't afford.
So they're playing the long game, not just worried about next quarter's profits.
Exactly. Think about Google. They dominate search, right? Which lets them pour billions into things like self-driving cars, artificial intelligence, stuff that seems crazy, impossible even, until it's not.
So they're building these really strong foundations that are difficult to compete with.
Yes. And he calls this last mover advantage, the idea that it's better to really dominate a niche and then scale up strategically, rather than just being first to market.
He uses Amazon and eBay as examples, right?
Perfect examples. Amazon starts with books, owns that market, then expands into, well, basically everything. eBay, same thing, online auctions, huge user base. Then they branch out. Either were first, but they became the giants by playing that long game.
And this long game strategy, it's all about building a monopoly. He talks about these 4 characteristics: proprietary technology, network effects, economies of scale, and branding. Let's break those down a bit. Starting with, what exactly does he mean by proprietary technology?
He means you have something unique, something defensible that other companies can't just copy. Could be a patent, a trade secret, or even just deep, deep knowledge of a specific technology. It's about having a real edge that's almost impossible to replicate.
Okay, so you've got your unique thing, your special sauce. Then there are network effects, which honestly, I think a lot of people misunderstand. So how do those play into a company's long-term success?
Network effects are all about that snowball effect. The more people use your product or service, the more valuable it becomes for everyone. Classic example, Facebook. More of your friends are on it, the more valuable it is for you to be on it too. Same with platforms like Airbnb, Uber. More users, more valuable the platform becomes.
Makes sense. And then there's economies of scale, right? So how do those factor into building a company that's built to last?
Economies of scale are all about efficiency. Basically, as you produce more of something, the cost per unit goes down, which is huge, right? Means big companies have this built-in advantage because they can sell for less, spend more on marketing, and still keep those profit margins healthy.
So it's not enough to just have a great product. You have to have a business model that lets you scale effectively.
100%. And that's where branding comes in. Because a strong brand, it creates that sense of trust and loyalty,
Yeah.
right? Allows you to charge a premium, attract the best talent. Think Apple. People wait in line for their products.
But he's careful to say, don't start with brand first. It's got to be about the substance, about building something truly undeniably valuable.
Yeah, he uses the example of Marissa Mayer trying to revive Yahoo.
Yeah,
All style, no real substance.
right, a cautionary tale. So a strong brand, it's built on quality, innovation, customer satisfaction. It's not just a marketing campaign. It has to reflect the real deal. Okay, so you've got this amazing product, right? This thing you poured your heart and soul into, but then what?
Right, because building it is just the first hurdle.
And this is where Thiel brings up this whole idea of distribution, which he says so many companies just completely get wrong.
It's huge. You can have the best product in the world, but if you can't get it into the hands of customers, it doesn't matter.
He's really challenging that build it and they will come mentality that, honestly, I think a lot of tech people especially fall into.
It's so tempting to think, oh, if it's good enough, people will just magically find it. But the real world doesn't work like that.
So why do you think that is? Why is distribution such an afterthought for some companies?
Part of it, I think, is that engineers, product people, they speak a different language. They're so focused on the tech, the features, that they kind of forget about the whole selling it to actual humans part.
It's like they're speaking code and the market is speaking, I don't know, emotions, desires.
Yeah. And what Thiel really drives home is that distribution isn't just about marketing or advertising even. It's about understanding these different channels that exist and then figuring out which one's going to work best for your specific product.
He talks about these four main categories: complex sales, personal sales, marketing and advertising, and viral marketing. And he has some really interesting examples of how these play out.
Yeah, like he uses SpaceX as the ultimate example of complex sales. I mean, you're selling rockets to governments, to NASA. It's huge deals, long sales cycles, regulations up the wazoo.
Totally different game than selling, like, T-shirts online.
Right. And then he talks about this company, Box, and their personal sales approach.
Yeah, sure.
So they started by really targeting these small teams within bigger companies, building those relationships, proving their value, and then gradually expanding from there.
So it's very targeted, very much about building that trust.
And it worked. And then, of course, you've got viral marketing, which, funnily enough, PayPal, Thiel's own company, used really effectively early on.
Right, back when it was still this new thing.
Yeah, they understood the power of those network effects, so they incentivized their users to get their friends on board, which created this whole chain reaction.
Word of mouth on steroids.
Exactly. But here's the thing. All these different approaches, they can work, but they work for different types of companies, right?
So how do you figure out which distribution channel is right for you? There's got to be some kind of framework.
And there is. This is where Thiel brings in this concept of the power law of distribution. Just like a small number of companies end up capturing most of the value in a market.
Which he talks about a lot.
Right. One distribution channel, it's usually going to be way more effective than all the others for your specific business.
So it's about finding that one channel that really, really works and then what? Doubling down, tripling down on it.
Exactly. Don't spread yourself too thin, trying to be everywhere at once. Focus your energy on the channel that's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck.
He also talks about this idea of selling your company, not just your product, which I think is so crucial, but often overlooked.
Oh, absolutely. That's about communicating your vision, your why. What makes you different? What makes you matter? It's about connecting with people on a deeper level.
It's that whole start with why thing.
Yes. People don't just buy what you do, they buy why you do it. They buy into your story.
And that applies to everything, right? From finding the right employees to attracting investors, even just getting good press.
It all comes back to that core story. You have to be able to articulate what makes you unique, what problem you're solving, why people should care.
And this actually ties into another big idea that Thiel explores throughout the book, the power law.
Because it's everywhere.
Right.
It's not just about working hard. It's about focusing that energy on the things that actually move the needle.
He says the power law is everywhere. Like, a small number of things always account for the vast majority of the results.
Totally. Like in venture capital, a handful of companies make almost all the returns. In music, a tiny fraction of artists sell most of the records. Even in cities, it's like a few major hubs drive most of the economic activity.
It's like that 80-20 rule, but on a whole other level.
Exactly. And Thiel's point is that we often underestimate just how unevenly these things are distributed. We want to believe it's more fair, you know. But the truth is, a few key decisions, the few key relationships, those are often the things that really determine the trajectory of our lives, our careers.
So how do we use this knowledge of the power law to actually make better decisions, both in business and just like life in general?
Well, for me, it starts with being way more intentional about where I put my energy. It's about figuring out, okay, what are the few things that really matter? What am I uniquely good at?
Instead of trying to be good at everything, which, spoiler alert, never works.
Right. You just end up spreading yourself too thin. It's about identifying those areas where you have a real competitive advantage, where you can make the biggest impact, and then going all in on those things.
So saying no to the distractions, even if there seem like good opportunities on the surface.
It's hard, but it's crucial. Because otherwise, you're just going to get pulled in a million different directions, and you'll never achieve that true leverage that comes from focusing on the right things.
It reminds me of another thing Thiel talks about, the importance of secrets. Like, he really believes there are still so many secrets left to be discovered. Valuable truths about, like, how the world works or human nature or even just specific markets.
He makes this distinction between natural secrets, like actual truths about the physical world, and then human secrets, which are more like things that people know but don't necessarily talk about.
Because they're taboo, or maybe they just haven't really thought about them consciously.
Yeah. And Thiel believes that uncovering these secrets, especially the human ones, it's like a key part of building a truly great company, a company that's not just doing things better, but doing things differently.
Can you give an example of what a human secret would look like in a business context?
Sure. Think about Airbnb. Before they came along, this idea of renting out your spare room to a complete stranger, it wasn't exactly mainstream. It was kind of a human secret. People did it, but not everyone was talking about it openly.
Because of the risk, maybe?
Yeah.
Or just the social stigma?
Exactly. But Airbnb, they tapped into this unmet need, this human secret, and created this massive global business out of it.
So how do we go about actually uncovering these secrets? Thiel gives a few interesting suggestions in the book.
One approach he talks about is to look for those things that people aren't allowed to talk about, the taboos, the forbidden topics. Because often that's where conventional wisdom is strongest and where there's the most potential for disruption.
It's about questioning the unquestionable.
Exactly. Another thing he talks about is looking for patterns that go against conventional wisdom. Things that seem weird or contradictory on the surface, but might reveal a deeper truth if you dig a little.
Like those little anomalies, those things that make you go, huh, that's strange. Why is that?
Yes, because those can be clues. They can point you in the direction of something truly new and important.
He talks about how great companies are often built around these secrets, these things that most people either miss or are too afraid to acknowledge.
He even goes so far as to say that a great company is a conspiracy to change the world. It's about finding those hidden truths, those things that most people don't see, and then working together to turn them into something real, something that can make a difference.
And that takes us to another big piece of the puzzle, building the right team.
Because you can have the most amazing secret in the world, but if you don't have the right people to help you bring it to life, it's not going to go anywhere.
He's a big believer in getting the foundation right from the start, which honestly just makes sense.
It's like building a house. If the foundation's messed up, the whole thing's going to collapse eventually. And it's a lot easier to get it right the first time than to try to fix it later.
And one of the most important early decisions, he says, is choosing your co-founders. Who are you going to be in the trenches with?
He compares it to picking your comrades during a war, which is intense but accurate. You want people who are not only crazy talented, but trustworthy, resilient, and who share your vision for the future.
He tells that story about this early investment he made in a company founded by Luke Nosek, who is actually his co-founder at PayPal.
Oh, right. And the company totally tanked, even though both founders were brilliant individually.
Because they just didn't work well together. They didn't have that shared understanding, that trust.
Which just goes to show, you can have the best idea in the world, but if you don't have the right people to execute it, you're going to struggle. It's all about the team.
Yeah, and it's not just about picking the right people from the start. It's about navigating all the other curveballs that come with building a company, especially today, like how fast everything is changing, all the tech disruption. That's got to be a huge part of the equation.
Oh, 100%. And that's where Thiel's whole take on humans and machines, it gets really interesting.
Mhm.
Because he basically says instead of being afraid of technology, we should be looking for ways to use it to, like, amplify human potential.
Which is the opposite of what we usually hear, right? It's all robots are taking our jobs, this, and automation is going to make humans obsolete, though.
Right? It's all doom and gloom. But Thiel, he's like, hold on a second. Computers, they're great at the stuff humans hate. The boring stuff, crunching numbers, doing repetitive tasks, processing tons of data. But they still can't replicate things like creativity or intuition or judgment. Those are still uniquely human skills.
So we have to figure out how to combine the best of both worlds. He talks about this idea of man-machine symbiosis.
Right, exactly. And the companies that figure that out, those are the ones that are going to thrive. And he actually uses his own experience at PayPal as an example.
Oh, right, with their fraud detection.
Yeah. They were losing millions of dollars to credit card fraud, and they just couldn't solve it with automation alone. The fraudsters were too smart. They kept finding new ways to game the system.
So what did they do?
They realized they needed humans in the loop. So they created this system where a computer would flag the most suspicious transactions, and then a human analyst would actually make the final call.
It was like a tag team.
Right. They called the system Igor.
Igor, the fraud-fighting duo. I love it.
And it totally worked. That hybrid approach, it was a game changer. It let them stay in business and eventually, become the PayPal we know today.
Which is such a good example of how we can use technology to make ourselves more powerful, not less. It's not about replacement, it's about augmentation.
100%. And that whole experience, it's actually what led Thiel to co-found Palantir, which, if you're not familiar...
You're just going to ask.
So they build software that helps analysts make sense of these massive, complex data sets, like in intelligence gathering or fraud detection, stuff like that. And Thiel sees Palantir as like the ultimate example of man-machine symbiosis. You're taking the power of algorithms, but combining it with the judgment and intuition of human experts.
It's like giving human intelligence a serious upgrade.
Exactly. And he believes this approach can be applied to so many different fields, from healthcare to education to, even things like national security.
It's about working with technology, not against it. Which, again, comes back to Thiel's whole thing about optimism, right?
Totally, because you need that belief that things can be better, that progress is possible, in order to actually build those solutions.
He talks about the clean tech bubble as kind of a cautionary tale about the difference between, like, blind optimism and that definite optimism we keep coming back to.
Right, because back in the mid-2000s, clean tech was this hot space. Everybody was excited about, solving climate change with all this new tech.
And there were some wins. But a lot of those companies also failed, right? Why was that?
A lot of them, honestly, they were driven by good intentions, but not necessarily a solid plan. It was like they were so focused on the goal, so optimistic about the future, that they underestimated the challenges, the competition, all the messy realities of, actually building a successful company.
So it was optimism without the work.
In a nutshell, yeah. And Thiel actually analyzes the whole clean tech bubble through the lens of those 7 questions he talks about in the book.
The ones about building a successful company.
Exactly. The engineering question, the timing question, the monopoly question, all those. And he makes a really compelling case that a lot of these clean tech companies, they didn't answer those questions well enough.
They were missing key pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah. Like they didn't have a product that was actually 10 times better than what was already out there, or their timing was off. Or they totally underestimated the importance of building a defensible monopoly.
So even though they had the passion, even though they had their hearts in the right place.
It wasn't enough. And he contrasts that with, like, Tesla.
Which is a great example because they were operating in that same space, but they clearly figured some things out.
Right. They had the tech, they had the timing, they built a crazy strong brand, and they understood that to really win, clean tech couldn't just be about saving the planet. It also had to tap into those other desires people have, like the desire for, status, luxury, a beautiful, well-designed product.
So it's not enough to just be a good idea. It has to be a good business, too.
Exactly. And that kind of brings us full circle to Thiel's core argument throughout the book. We need more people who are willing to question things, to think for themselves, to really own the future they want to build.
He ends the book with that great question, too. What's your 0 to 1 idea?
Which is such a powerful question. And I don't think he just means, like, starting a company. It's more about approaching life with that same sense of purpose, that same desire to make a real impact.
It's about identifying those areas where you can make a unique contribution, where you can go from 0 to
Mhm.
1, and then having the guts to actually pursue those ideas, you
Yeah,
know?
really go for it,
Mm.
because that's how progress happens. One crazy idea, one bold move at a time.
I love it. So to everyone listening, that's our challenge to you. What's your 0 to 1? What are you going to create? Go out there and build it. And if this deep dive into Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 has sparked even a little bit of that thinking, then we've done our job.